there's been, 100 or more businesses lost in Victoria, and substantial businesses. A lot of people are hurting in Victoria right now. Surely they'd be cheering on the Queensland Senator for standing up for their jobs.
Yeah, and good on him for doing that. And but the death of manufacturing did not get this way because of a lack of government action. We had the Gillard government give hundreds of millions of dollars to big manufacturing companies to supposedly keep Holden and Ford in Australia for a decade, and within a few years they were gone. The reason we've chased manufacturing out in Australia is because our incredibly high cost of labour, our stringent regulatory regime, and the cost of goods that are made in Australia and the cost of energy in Australia. It's not because of a lack of government subsidies. And yes, people are hurting in Victoria, and you have to wonder what they're thinking when they look to the government and the Victorian government, and they've just plonked on another $24 billion of debt onto the credit card. And Daniel Andrews will go around saying that the economy is in a bad shape now. It's over $600 million in deficit because of the coronavirus. But I can tell you now, the budget was not looking in good shape prior to the coronavirus. We had blowouts all over the place. $5 billion on the Westgate Tunnel, $2 billion on level crossings, over $2 billion on the Metro Rail Tunnel. This Victorian government is hopeless at managing big projects and infrastructure projects, and the government, the budget. And it really, how can we trust the Victorian government to care about manufacturing in general if they can't manage the economy?
Well, over 100 businesses, that's the headline out of the Herald Sun. Over 100 businesses since the coronavirus came on the scene. They'll just use that as the skirt to hide their modesty, Ev. That's it. I mean, you've got now that outbreak at a northwestern suburb. McDonald's has now gone to a second McDonald's store. You've got some problems that are occurring in some of the great worker parts of Melbourne. You would think the Victorian government would be onto this thing, like a limpet mine, but they just seem to be coming around mopping up and telling tales of woe afterwards. There's almost some sort of schadenfreude here. They almost seem to be enjoying it.
You would think so. And we saw this week the Chief Medical Officer in Victoria mention that golf and fishing were banned, not because of any medical advice, as Daniel Andrews claimed that it was, but because it was deemed as non-essential. So you couldn't really have a kid going off to the not being able to go to the playground while dad goes out and hits golf. So what we're knowing now is the medical advice is not medical advice, it's the vibe. And from the Victorian government, you're not getting any sort of mentality of shared sacrifice. They've just given themselves a pay rise. I mean, we did some polling at the IPA that found that 74% of Australians would like politicians and senior public servants that are over $150,000 a year wicket to take a 20% pay cut, as most of the productive private sector economy have. And that productive private sector economy goes on to pay, through their taxes, the wages of these public servants. You heard those numbers before. 72.5% of people relying on government for their income. That has to change. But the attitude of the Victorian government throughout this crisis has been hopeless. This is a government that I think is increasingly on the nose, and the 2022 election can't come soon enough.
Yeah, well, time will tell. The Queensland government have got some similar plays coming out of a similar book. New South Wales government does too. I think the South Australian government today proclaimed coronavirus free. South Australia, that is the place that is coronavirus free. Western Australia, well, it locked you on the farm, didn't it, Caroline? What did you do for those couple of weeks?
We were putting in a crop, which we finished putting in today. So I spent most of the time in the kitchen cooking. But I was lucky enough to be able to take all my computers home, set up my office, and I was business as usual as much as possible. But when I came back to Perth, I had to get an approval to say I was returning to my primary residence. And when I was crossing that border between the wheat belt and the Perth areas, I was stopped by the police. And it wasn't until afterwards I'd gone through, and it was fine. They were lovely. They were very polite. They just wanted to check my approval. I got to the other side, and it dawned on me that I couldn't just drive from the farm to Perth without being stopped. Like that whole notion of a freedom to do something that was so simple had been restricted just felt so weird, because in a practical sense it had never occurred to me. Thankfully, we are seeing those intra-state borders being reduced back. So now there's only 4 districts instead of, I think there was 8 originally. So hopefully we'll start to get a few more people out to the wheat belt, because, you know, we still do rely on a bit of tourism out our way.